Hello everyone. I've got more Warhammer The Old World battle reports for you. I made a little post about it, but my apologies on taking a little bit of an absence on the YouTube content lately. I've been away from home for a couple of weeks, but during that time I managed to sneak in some games of Warhammer The Old World, and then the past weekend we just had, I had a couple of buddies come over and we got a good 3 games of Warhammer The Old World in, so I will talk about those as well. Some of those games I actually didn't play in. We did basically all 1v1s, so we had a couple of tables running, and when my game basically finished a little bit early, I tried to run over, get some photos, get a little bit of a summary of what was going on in the other games. So I won't be giving as in-depth a kind of battle report on those ones, but I do want to talk about them a little bit because we've got all kinds of different armies on the tables today, and I'm sure some people are wondering how Lizardmen play in the Old World, how Dwarves play in the Old World, and I've mostly only talked about vampire counts and Bretonnians so far, so I figured it would be nice to get a couple of those armies featured on the channel. Just something I do want to make note of though, unfortunately for this first battle report only, I had some family plans I had to attend later in the day, and I was thinking we were going to play a bit of a smaller game, but then we had another player show up and we decided to do a 2v1, increase the points, work them in, so we didn't really have enough time to finish everything. This one's only going to go for about 4 turns, but I still think there's enough stuff to warrant going over this game in a little mini battle report here. Also don't have a ton of photos and stuff either, so I will be a little bit on the brief side when it comes to going over this battle report. But I'm going to be bringing about 1250 points of Bretonnians. However, it's going to be about actually only 900, 800-ish points of Bretonnians and 300, 350-ish of Dwarven allies. Yep, I wanted to try out the ally system for this game, so I took as many points of dwarves that would be allowed, that's why I don't know the exact number off the top of my head here, in a 1250 point list. Also, we decided to do 1250 for a lot of these games because Games Workshop kind of seemed to be encouraging that with the lists kind of out of the box. Not that any of us are really playing with those armies, but yeah, it just seemed to be like a good barrier of entry number for people getting into the game, and probably would be a little bit easier to learn how to play if we figured in these smaller point lists than with larger ones. But here we are playing a 2,500 point game, so I guess I'm a bit of a hypocrite. Well, what are you gonna do? Anyways, yeah, I got a ton of peasants. I've got a unit of foot knights that are kind of my heavy hitters for the Bretonnian side of things. I have a paladin with heroic killing blow, or was it the vow of heroism is what it's called now. Very minimal loadout. He's literally just got that and a lance and a shield and a horse, I believe. We've got a paladin BSB. I've got a prophetess. I believe she's level 4. And the dwarves took a, I think it's called a dragon slayer to lead their army. The dwarven army that I have allied with me, not my allied dwarven opponent. I know it's a little confusing. But yeah, the 300 or so points of dwarves I have is going to have that dragon slayer. Some more normal slayers, about 8 or so, 8 handgunners to fulfill the core requirements, and a cannon, because I figured the Bretonnians aren't really bringing a bunch of hard-hitting stuff here. The knights do have great weapons, but I figured the dwarves would kind of be the hard hitters in this army. My actual dwarven ally player here, he's bringing another 1250, is going to have an organ gun, a bunch of crossbows. Those are the units in the line there in the bottom left of the photo. Another unit of, I believe, crossbows on the far right side. He's got an Anvil of Doom, and I think you put a character on top of there. I don't remember exactly what he had. It might have been a Ruinsmith, or it might have just been a Dwarf Lord. And a unit of either Longbeards or Dwarf Warriors on the far right side there as well. And that's about it. If there's anything else, I'll be sure to bring it up during the battle report here. But going over the Lizardman players list really fast here, he's got about 2 or 3 units of 10-man skinks. They're going to be trying to dart across the battlefield with poison dart blowpipes. He's got a 5-man Saurus cavalry unit that also has a hero attached to that unit as well. Just a Saurus champion. I don't remember his magical loadout, unfortunately. Big unit of Temple Guard, big unit of Saurus infantry. A Bastiladon that has that light laser beam thing on the back of it. Slann Mage Priest, and a Carnosaur that is ridden by a Saurus Lord. This guy, I do remember his loadout. He had a Bedazzled Helm for -1 to hit, and then the Lizardmen also have a magic item. I think it's like 40 points or something to give out like a 6-inch aura of -1 to hit as well. So he's got both of those, meaning most likely you're only hitting that guy on 6s. Our best chance of killing that guy is probably going to be with shooting attacks, so we'll have to see if we can gun him down before he gets too close. Last thing to make note of is the Lizardman player did take a pair of Lizardons. Other than that, the battlefield has a watchtower kind of in the middle. We aren't going to be using any building occupying rules for that. It's just there to kind of block line of sight. There are a couple of hills on our side of the battlefield. There's one hill on the Lizardman side, woods kind of tucked away in the middle there, and another building that you just can't really occupy. I also put my spells up here so you can just see what my little prophetess has available. And yeah, the battle's going to start. We have the Lizardman taking the first turn. He's going to move up as quick as possible on both of the flanks with the Skinks, the Saurus cavalry on the left side, and his Carnosaur Lord and the Lizardons and the other unit of Skinks on the right side. His Temple Guard and his Saurus infantry are going to just be doing a slow and steady advance for most of the game here, and kind of just protecting the, the Slann Mage Priest in the back. Also, on that note, first turn, Slann Mage Priest, barely anything is going to be occurring in terms of magic. My Prophetess just gets some good rolls. He just didn't have the best of rolls, and Slanns don't seem to get like a +1 to casting or anything anymore, so yeah, I was just able to shut down his magic on the first turn. And not much of the Lizardman stuff's going to be in range on the first turn, so we will move on to the Dwarves and Bretonnians, who are going to let out a pretty decent volley fire of attacks. In terms of movement, not much is going to happen. We're just going to kind of shift our lines around on the left to prepare for that Saurus cavalry charge, and we're going to move some of our units on the right to prepare for the Carnosaur Lord. My units are going to focus fire on the Skinks that are moving up, the bowmen and the handgunners on top of that hill. I think I peel away about 4 or 5 of them. They are at skirmish formation and at long range, so not too high a casualty output. Dwarven crossbows are going to shoot at the cold ones. I want to say they get 1 of them, but not too much damage. My trebuchet is going to misfire on the first turn, which is a theme you're going to be seeing in all the other battle reports I'm covering today. And yeah, the organ gun's able to lay a couple of good shots into the Saurus infantry. I might have actually had the handgunners shoot that unit as well instead of the Skinks, but can't really recall. The other shooting that is going to happen is mostly from my wizard and the stone thrower on the right side. The stone thrower is going to pick off a couple more of the Saurus. My wizard's going to cast a fireball on the Skinks. I think I roast about 4 to 6 of them. Not too bad. And the rest of my spells are actually going to be going off this turn. I feel a little bit bad that I outclassed the Slann Mage Priest so bad on the first turn here. I get, it's called Lady's Vengeance, I believe. It gives you +1 strength and armor piercing. I'm going to cast that on my unit of Foot Knights, and I think that's about it. He might have actually dispelled 1 of my spells this turn, but all the other ones are going to go off successfully. Moving back to the Lizardman player's turn, he's going to continue his advance forward, slow and steady in the middle. On the left side, his cavalry is unable to make a charge on the second turn, so he's just going to position himself as best as possible to make that charge on the third, but hopefully stay out of the half-range barrier of all of our units. He's also, I believe, going to use that woods to give him a bit of cover. I know for a fact the Skinks are going to position themselves ever so slightly to have just enough percentage in the woods that they're going to get a cover save as well. The other side is going to maybe, I don't know if the Carnosaur gets a charge on the second turn, but I know for a fact it's going to be getting into melee on the third turn. The rest of his units aren't going to want to charge because they're all range units, so he's just going to continue to move up his Skinks to pluck away at us with poison attacks. The Lizardons are going to shoot their first salvo of the game this turn. Wasn't too impressive. He picks up a couple of the Dwarf Warriors with one of his shots, and I believe a Foot Knight or 2 with his other shots. His Slann manages to get his act together on the second turn. I don't recall the name of all of his spells, but it's basically like this template that you drop, and a bunch of little woodland spirits come out of it and start clawing away at you. And he's going to place that really close to my man-at-arms and my Foot Knights. I don't believe you can, place it on a unit at the start. You might be able to, and my memory's just off here. But he's going to place that, and eventually it's going to hit the man-at-arms and the foot knights, and it'll actually hit the foot knights for a second time during this game, and it'll take away at least 3 or 4 of my knights in that unit over the course of the battle here. So a little bit more success there from the Slann magic this phase. He'll also cast a monsoon in front of my handgunners and my archers, kind of blocking their shots on his temple guard. I was alright with this, though. To be honest, my bowmen were probably just going to continue to focus down that skink unit, and the handgunners can always just kind of change their shots to the Saurus infantry if it's needed. But yeah, he also had a buff spell that makes it so the unit can't charge, but it'll drastically increase their defensive capabilities. He might swap that spell from like the Temple Guard over to the Saurus infantry at some point during this game because he takes so many range casualties on them. But yeah, he's going to try his best to keep that buff up as well. And like I said, just have a pretty good magic phase all around this turn. And that'll pretty much conclude the second turn. The Lizardman shooting, fairly effective. Plucked away a couple of guys. On the left side, I should have mentioned too, is 2 skink units do get a couple of shots in. Mostly on my cannon, though. And yes, he did get some lucky poisons, but the cannon's got such a high toughness, it pretty much shrugs the rest of it off. I think he kills a crew member and does a wound or 2 to the cannon. And that'll be about it for the Lizardman player's second turn, and we'll move back to the Bretonnian Dwarven Alliance. This is going to be a good turn for us, actually. My Foot Knights are going to make a charge on the Razordon and the Skinks. I think he does get a stand and shoot and plucks away a couple of my guys, but yeah, I get a nice little combined charge there with the Foot Knights. My man-at-arms are going to just be trying their best to get right up in the grill of the Temple Guard and the Saurus infantry. I know I'm not going to win that combat, but I'm just hoping to delay them as long as possible with this unit that's relatively inexpensive. And my Slayers on the far side there with the Ironbreakers are going to try to get into position to fight that cavalry, but unfortunately I'm a little too wide. Linehammer kind of betrayed me in this situation where I can't really get a good charge off, and spoiler alert, I'm going to be spending a good chunk of this game trying to get around the right side of my ally players' Ironbreakers. Our second turn shooting is good. Magic won't be so good, but I'll go over that in a sec. My cannon on the second turn, maybe it was the third, but I was pretty sure it was the second, was able to make a successful grape shot on that Saurus cavalry unit. The crossbows will also focus fire on that unit, and the Ironbreakers will have a satchel charge that the leader of the unit can throw out. And yeah, the grape shot peels away, I think, 3 of the Saurus cav, and the rest of the shooting takes out the other one. I think the champion, or the character that was attached to the unit's the only thing that's left, and he might even be wounded at this point. The monsoon is definitely a little bit annoying for my targets of opportunity, but like I said, I was okay with having my peasant bowmen continue to pluck away at the skinks, and they will do so. And the handgunners, I think, just have to shift over instead of shooting the Temple Guard to shooting the Saurus infantry. But we also have an organ gun on the other side that's focusing fire on that unit. So again, not really the end of the world, but there was a bit of unfortunate news. The organ gun was positioned with this rock that the dwarf player was hoping to use as cover, but it also obscured his shot on the Carnosaur. So he really won't be able to light that thing up with probably the best weapon we have available. His crossbows will shoot at it, but I don't think they even get a wound through. My trebuchet is going to be still dealing with that first turn misfire, I believe, and we'll be able to shoot on the third turn. And the grudge thrower is going to continue to just drop some rocks on that main Saurus infantry block that's moving up. And that'll be about it for our second turn actual shooting. My magic pretty much gets shut down by the Slann on this turn. I think I'm able to sneak through like one of my buff spells, but that's about it. My Foot Knights were able to get a combined charge off on the Skinks and one of the Razordons. I decided to use hand weapon shields for this combat, just because I had that Lady's Vengeance buff spell on the unit for +1 strength and armor piercing. I figured I'm already wounding the Skinks on, I believe, 2s with that result, so the great weapons kind of seem like overkill. Might have been worth it just to deal some extra damage to the Razordon, but yeah, that was kind of my school of thought there. And the combat's going to go pretty well for me. I killed off most of the Skinks. There's only a couple remaining. And the Razordon, I don't know if we did this correctly, but I think you're supposed to randomize who actually gets hit in the close combat. So I don't actually get many wounds on the Razordon, maybe only one, and then I kill off like 2 of the crew members. So that was a little bit fortunate for the Lizardman player, because I'd much rather have the Razordon killed off and the skink crew surviving. But it is what it is. He rolls his leadership results, and he just kind of gives some ground, and my Foot Knights are going to pursue and go for another round during the Lizardman player's turn. And on that note, we will move on to the Lizardman player's third turn. The Carnosaur is going to continue his rampage against the Dwarven warriors here. His skinks are going to take some tactical positioning on the left side there inside the woods and just kind of try to conserve their numbers as best as possible, basically, and pluck away at us. His Bastillodon's trying to move up and support him as well, but that thing, it's a little bit behind at this point of the battle, unfortunately. The Temple Guard and the Saurus just decide to ignore my Man-at-Arms unit. Truly an insult. How dare you? I guess he decided he had better targets to deal with. The Saurus warriors are going to kind of try to get themselves in position to fight my Foot Knights, but I don't think they're going to be able to just because the frontage is so occupied by skink units and Razordons and the crew and all that stuff. So they're just going to position themselves as best as possible, and the Temple Guard are just going to continue to lumber forward. Sorry for my misenunciation there. And that's about it for really the Lizardman player's third turn. His magic's going to be successful again. He's got this spell, like I keep bringing up here, this little woodland spirit thing that keeps hopping around with all these little critters, and they keep attacking you. And yeah, that template's just going to keep bouncing around my Man-at-Arms and my Foot Knight unit and chipping away at both of them. So that was most of his damage output, though, in terms of magic. He just kind of gives his buff spells out and continues to use his Monsoon to block as many shots as possible. When it goes back to our turn, I'm going to continue my carnage with the Foot Knights. I believe I get into combat with either another Razordon or a skink unit together. I can't remember if it was a combined charge or I only got one of the units. But yeah, I kill the first batch and then I move on to the next one. So yeah, that's going to be kind of the story of my Foot Knights for their first battle here. Just chopping away at skinks and Razordons and taking a lot of damage from a bunch of little force critters from a little vortex template spell, courtesy of the Slann Mage Priest. But I can't say I was too disappointed with them. Good first performance, their first game. And that'll be it for really my melee performances on the right side here. I think my Man-at-Arms are unable to actually make a charge because of the way he positioned himself. He was just out of my front arc with all of his units. His Slanns also being a little bit crafty, making sure the Man-at-Arms don't break through their lines and sneak in an attack on the Slann. But yeah, unable to make a charge with that unit. My Slayers are still awkwardly trying to get around the Iron Breakers, who did finish off the Saurus Cavalry champion at this point. And yeah, that's about it really in terms of the melee. The Dwarves are just continuing to slog it out with that Carnosaur Lord. I think at this stage he's killed either 10 or 12 of them. It basically just keeps killing the front rank every single round. So yeah, they're going to be reduced to about, I think, 10, maybe 12 dwarves at this point. Like, they're getting close to half strength. So, definitely not good. And I don't think they've retaliated a single blow to that Carnosaur Lord in the melee exchange. It was... I want to say this was, like, coming close to the last turn here. We might have had one more turn after this, but this will probably be the turn I believe my Longbowmen are able to finish off that skink unit, despite the absurd amount of minuses I had because they had skirmish and then they had cover. Most of my guys were hitting on 6s, but yeah, they managed to get enough lucky shots in on those skinks after 3 or 4 volleys. Handgunners, same story as always, just continuing to focus down that infantry block of Saurus, and we're going to reduce them to a pretty good amount. So much so that when they eventually do close in for combat with those Foot Knights, it's actually kind of a toss-up of who's going to win that. Because, I mean, if you look at them at first, that was a big block of Saurus, and I'm sorry, I don't think the Foot Knights are typically going to win that. A lot of factors go into that, who got the charge, etc., but I don't know. I was a little skeptical of winning that at first, but at this stage of the battle, things are looking a little bit better for that matchup, I'd say. And yeah, my trebuchet manages to drop a lot. My trebuchet manages to drop a rock right on top of the Bastillodon. Unfortunately, when it came to rolling for the multi-wounds, I only got one, which was just unlucky. But, I'll take it. It's still better than nothing. That's about it for our shooting. My wizard doesn't really do too much magic this phase. I think I do get off another fireball at the Saurus warriors. At this stage, my dwarven ally was like, yeah, let's just try to focus them down as much as we can. And, yeah, like I said, getting reduced to like half strength or so. I think we did a pretty good job at that. But that's going to be getting close to the end of this battle report here. The Carnosaur Lord is not going to be able to finish off all of the Dwarven warriors, tragically, before the game ends. I believe 5 or 6 of them are going to remain at the end of this battle. But, I mean, I'd feel happy if I was that guy devouring, like 16 or so, or 15 Dwarven warriors. That's not bad at all. And, yeah, that'll be kind of it for that side in terms of the battles. My Foot Knights, I did mention, kind of got into a brief combat with the Saurus. We didn't really have much time. I had to do like one rush round of combat there. I think I actually did get the charge somehow in some way, and the Furious Charge helped me out a lot, but I was unable to break the Saurus. I think I did lose 2 knights in the exchange, but he lost, I believe, 4 or 5 men. And yeah, it was pretty favorable overall for us, but I was far from defeating that unit, and my men-at-arms were occupying the Temple Guard at the very last turn there, and they lost their combat pretty bad, so I don't know. The Lizardmen player didn't choose to basically pursue me. He decided to do a reform and support the infantry, the Saurus infantry, against my Foot Knights. Really a toss-up of who was going to win that. I think point-wise, we had an advantage at this stage of the battle, just because of how much damage we did to the Skinks, his cavalry units, and really the only thing that he got a lot of damage in on was the Dwarven warriors and plucking away a couple of wounds on like our range units. He did kill my cannon, I forgot to mention that. Eventually, with those Skinks in the woods, they did pluck it away with poison attacks, but yeah, I think we had the point advantage here, but my Foot Knights were kind of in an awkward situation when we needed to call this game, and I felt bad about that. So I think it's fair to say we're going to leave this game at a draw, and it's an ambiguous one at that, because, like I said, we had a bit of a point advantage, but easily could have been a big swing for the Lizardmen, so I think you can understand why we're calling it their draw and not a victory for either side. But let's move on to the next battle report, and I will say all these other battle reports, I did see them all the way through. They're full quality games, and I will try my best to go over everything without boring anyone, but yeah, I will give all the details and stuff. I know this one was a little bit on the shorter side, and unfortunately I'm a little bit short on pictures as well. All of the next battles are going to be 1250 point lists, and nothing's going to be getting changed up in between. You're going to be taking the same list to each of the battles. So I just want to make note of that because a couple of these armies are going to be popping up a few times. The first game's going to be the Beastmen versus the Bretonnians, and my Beastmen opponent wanted to take as many Minotaurs as he owned in this list. He's got a 4-man unit and a 5-man unit there. The 5-man's got a motley crew loadout of hand weapon shields and great weapons and a banner and a champion. And the 4-man unit also has a champion, but I believe they all have hand weapon shields. Each of the champions in those units can take, I think, 25 points of magic equipment. I know he gave like one of them a sword of striking or some kind of like cheap magic weapon, and he gave another one a potion. So yeah, they're both kind of fully kitted out, ready for battle units. In the back there, he's got a 10-man Ungor unit. I could be wrong on if it's Ungor or Gore. It's the one that has +1 toughness, like toughness 4, and I believe a weapon skill of 4, so a little bit better in close combat. He has a BSB for the army that's going to be attached to that unit. A Beastman, what's it called? Razor Gore Chariot. Apologies, couldn't remember the name. And that thing's got like a toughness of 5 or something, and it deals like D6 +2 impact hits. That thing hits hard. And I like that he had a little tiny Minotaur model that he put on there just to carry home the theme of this army. And it might not be featured in the picture here, but this army is actually led by a Doom Bull, and that guy's like fully kitted out, ready for battle. I'm taking something pretty similar to my 1250 list. I basically just cut the dwarves and filled in more Bretonnians. I've got two 20-man peasant archer units. In the bottom left there, they're not going to be deployed like that at all. I don't know why I sent them up like that. I think I was just transporting them to another table at this time. But yeah, they're going to be in either skirmish formation or they're going to be deployed in a 10x2 line. That's my plan at least. I've got 20 man-at-arms in the middle there. I've got the Blessed Triptych. Sorry if I misenunciated. That's a new item there. But yeah, I got the Grail guy who carries that. Makes like the unit stubborn, I believe. The unit has a champion. They have a banner. And I also bought a Sergeant at Arms that's going to go into that unit. He's to the right of them in the picture here. That's Village Elder O'Connell for anyone who's been following the Kaiju League. This is what I meant by my halflings and my Bretonnians are pretty integrated. I like to kind of run them like this, where it's like a motley crew mix of races here in the picture. I think it's kind of cool. Anyways, I've got that man-at-arms block, the Sergeant-at-Arms. I've got a Trebuchet in the back. I have a level 4 Prophetess. I will show her magic spells in just a few seconds here. I've got a Paladin BSB who's just so minimally loaded out. I basically just took him because Bretonnians get the BSB upgrade for free. I gave him like a Morning Star and a shield. Like, that's literally it. And he's going to go inside the Foot Knight unit. I will probably be attaching the Prophetess in most of these battles inside the Foot Knight unit as well, because she can like kind of sit comfortably in there with one of the Bretonnian rules. And I think that's about... Oh, nope. And then I have a Bretonnian Lord who is riding a Royal Pegasus, has a lance and a shield, and the Heroic Killing Blow. Sorry, what's it called now? The Vow of Heroism. I constantly get that confused. You'll have to forgive me. I've been playing like old Bretonnians for God only knows how many years now, so it's kind of hard adjusting to the new terminology, but you get my point. Also, if you're wondering why I have a Royal Pegasus BSB as a Bretonnian Lord guy. I painted the model up recently. In a more competitive list, I actually am going to be using that. But yeah, I just wanted to get it on the table, and you'll have to use your imagination. That's not a banner, that's a lance. Some photos of our opening deployment and the board as well. Probably the only big thing to make note of is I have a couple of defensive fences, you could say, to kind of keep my archers protected, and the Beastman player is going to have an advantageous piece of cover in that forest on the dead middle of the board. Obviously, I'm sure you can tell this table's a little bit smaller than what it should be for a standard game, but at this time we had like 2 separate games of Warhammer being run in tandem, and table space was a bit limited, so we had to make do with what we had, and I think we still had a pretty good game. Also, you gotta respect the OG classics of busting out a Warhammer game on the kitchen table, which is very much what we were doing at this time, so yeah. Anyways, first turn's gonna go to the Beastmen, just because the Bretonnians obviously have to kneel and pray to the Lady of the Lake. And I'll be a little brief, just because not too much happens on these first 2 turns. The Beastman player is going to move as quick as possible to close the gap. He took no wizard, he has no range, he doesn't even have Beastman ambushers, so yeah, he's just got a pure melee force that does actually move pretty fast. So, like I said, it'll only take him like 2 turns to close that gap and get within charge distance of me. But during that time, my archer unit that's on the fence line near the farmstead, the left side of the photograph here, it's able to reduce that smaller Minotaur unit to half its size. He's down to like 2 Minotaurs. One of them might even be wounded. So yeah, I did a total of like 6 or 7 wounds on that unit within the first 2 turns. That was pretty good. Part of that might have been because I got the Curse of Arrow Attraction spell off on that unit, but I think, to be honest, I just had pretty good rolls. The other unit is going to take some kind of long-range lucky shots at the larger unit, but as I mentioned earlier, he's going to use that forest as cover, then I'm going to be at long range, and soon enough I'm going to have my man-at-arms and my foot knights kind of advancing up on that area, which will just further deny the shooting capabilities of my archers. So I actually misplay with them and keep them kind of tucked on that fence line for like the first third of this game. I should have been moving them out much earlier after I realized my shots of opportunity were going to disappear. But I was a little bit lazy. You live and you learn. So they will move out later on. The Man-at-Arms and my Foot Knights are just going to march up towards that tree line. We're not quite going in there yet, but we're preparing for the melee that's about to happen. I can tell he's going to basically sit in there, get cover until all the Beastmen are set up in position, and then he's going to launch out. So I'm thinking I might launch a bit of a preemptive assault, try to keep him tied up there with the Man-at-Arms on the Minotaur unit, and then hopefully my Foot Knights will be able to close in and clean everything up. If the Foot Knights can't do it, what I'm going to do is have my Bretonnian Lord on the Royal Pegasus. I'm going to have him fly around the far side, and he will be able to support that combat as well, probably by turn 3 or so. The last thing I want to make note of for my ranged firepower here is I had a spell, I believe it's called like Flaming Swords or something like that. It's a small blast template that I get to place, and I basically roll a d6 and get to move it at the start of every single movement phase, and all the units that it touches take like 2d6 or d6 strength 3, AP 2 auto hits. This spell is going to be in effect for pretty much the entirety of this battle. The Beastman player will try to dispel it, but he has no wizards, so chances are slim that's ever going to happen. And this spell is devastating. It is probably responsible for half the damage that both of those Minotaur units are going to take from this point in the game. I did shoot at him a lot, and I will drop a Trebuchet rock on the large Minotaur unit at some point. But I specifically remember rolling a 1 for the multi-wound center hit of the template, like, every single time during this game. And, yeah, this flame spell is really what's going to get a lot of the damage done to these Beastmen. It's just going to bounce between all of his units and just continually deal damage every single turn. So very important that I make note of that spell now. I believe when it goes back to the Beastman player's turn, his large unit that's been hiding out in the woods there is going to launch forth at my Man-at-Arms unit. And this is probably going to be the combat that will decide the fate of the game, arguably. And I'll go into that soon enough. But while he's doing that, his 2-man unit of other Minotaurs has been so weakened that they decide to turn around and backtrack into the woods, which I thought was just absolutely hilarious. Instead, he's going to have that unit of Ungors, or whatever they, again, don't know if they're Ungors or Gors, whatever one's got the +1 toughness and weapon skill to their profile. That unit with the BSB is going to be moving up and taking the place of the Minotaurs, since they've got more numbers amongst them. And the Chariot's kind of just hanging out in the back, covering the rear of the Minotaur unit, his large one that has the Doom Bowl in it. I think he realized what I was doing with my Royal Pegasus, and he wants to make sure that either the Royal Pegasus is just going to deal with the Chariot, or if it does decide to charge into the unit, he'll be able to respond with the Chariot charging my character when it goes back to his turn. So that's about it, and now we're going to go over this combat with the Man-at-Arms. I think most people on paper are just going to expect this unit to get slaughtered by the Doom Bowl alone. I mean, seriously, like a Doom Bowl alone should be able to win this combat, right? Well, you would be mistaken. The Beastman player started this combat off getting his Primal Fury on like a double 1 roll or something, which I believe means he gets to reroll his misses, and he gets an extra attack or something like that. So you could say he had some pretty good setup to slaughter my unit. However, I don't know if it was the Dice Gods screwing him over or the Dice Gods helping me out, because these guys flopped their attack so hard. His Doom Bowl decides to challenge one of my guys to a duel, and I think he deals a total of like 2 wounds, and then he wins the duel for like another one. I remember the total combat res he got out of it was 3. And, yeah, that's definitely not what you would be expecting there against a Man-at-Arms unit champion. Additionally, I think all of those Minotaurs just barely managed to kill 3 or 4 Man-at-Arms. I mean, like, he barely kills the front rank. He might not even kill the whole front rank. I'm not exaggerating. It was just some of the worst rolling I've ever seen. I kind of felt bad for my opponent at this stage. And then I think I had like a buff spell or something, and I can't remember. I might have made some ward saves, or I had an armor save that I might have actually got in this situation, because I did shield light armor instead of doing the two-handed loadout for the fight. I really can't remember, but yeah, he just had really bad luck, and I feel bad, but they flopped the combat pretty bad. I think in addition to that, because like I managed to get like 1 wound back or something with the supporting attacks, I actually managed to tie him up in the combat, or he gives ground a bit, as strange as that sounds. I will say I had that blessed triptych thing, so like, even if he did win the combat, I would have not like completely shattered there. I could choose like what I wanted to do as an action. But yeah, you can see from the photos there, he like barely killed anything, and is going to lose that combat and actually somehow back up further into the woods, where we will continue to pursue him. And a lot of other stuff's going to happen, because that was his turn, and now when it goes back to my turn, I gotta make a decision of, do I launch everything at that unit? And I think I'm going to do that. I have my Bretonnian Lord charge into the rear of the unit, and I'm going to make a mistake on this, which I'll comment on in a second. I have the Foot Knights charge into that unit as well. The rest of my shooting is just going to be focused on whatever target I can get at this stage. I think my archers get a lucky single wound or two on the chariot from a very long-range volley. That fire spell that's bouncing around might also get a wound in on the chariot, but I'm more or less focusing it on the Minotaurs and the Gore unit at this stage. I believe it can bounce into combats too. I mean, I could be wrong on that, and I don't know if we actually did that, but I might be using it on that larger Minotaur unit at this stage. It is just continually pumping out wounds for me. I'm going to put a little diagram up right about now and just show you the path of destruction and my rough estimate of damage that this spell did during the game right about now. Yeah, and again, I could be off with some of that, but even my opponent was talking to me about it afterwards. This spell was devastating. I only had it for this one battle, too. So, yeah, it was pretty clutch, you could say. Anyways, the combat is going to begin, and I make a big mistake. His Doom Bowl, I don't know if it issued a challenge or not, but the point I was going to make is my Bretonnian Lord, I think he might have had to issue a challenge in the first place, and I just forgot about it. But I don't issue a challenge to the Doom Bowl, and that was a critical mistake. I forgot at this stage somehow that this guy had the virtue of heroism and could one-shot that thing. And sure enough, when I roll the dice, he gets that 6 that I was looking for, and I could have taken the Doom Bowl out right here and now. I don't know why I didn't do it at the time. I knew I was going to be attacking first and everything, and like, this guy wasn't like a super high, he is expensive, but like, he's not the highest investment. If I ended up losing him, it wasn't the end of the world. Like, I still think I had enough advantages in this battle to win it, but for whatever stupid reason, I do not make that challenge, and you will see in a couple of minutes why that was a huge mistake. I just do my normal attacks. I think I kill off one of the wounded Minotaurs, but they all have different Motley Crew loadouts, and we could have been doing this wrong, but I believe, like, since I'm attacking a guy with a shield and he has a different save than the guy with a great weapon in the unit, like, I don't believe the excess wounds bleed over to the great weapon character in the unit. Let me know if I'm wrong, please, in the comments, if you're listening to this and you happen to know how that rule works. When I went to the Motley Crew second, it just talks about the weapon loadouts. It doesn't talk about, like, how the unit would distribute wounds. I probably missed something in the rule book, but again, please let me know if you have any information on that. It would be greatly appreciated. But anyways, yeah, that's the reason. My Bretonnian Lord only kills like one of them, and it was a waste because his heroic killing blow alone could have killed that guy, and then the rest of the wounds could have gone on something else. And yeah, then the rest of my units charge in. The Foot Knights get a couple of wounds. I don't finish off this Minotaur unit. It continues to either give ground or fall back in good order. Can't quite recall. But I continue to pursue him. And we might have done this wrong. Again, if you happen to know how this works, let me know. But my Bretonnian Lord was on the rear of the unit. So when they fall back, does he continue to stay on the rear of the unit? I believe this is the case because I know, like, if I charge the flank and the unit backs up, like, I continue to do so unless they get a specific result that allows them to change facing. So I believe we did this right, having the Bretonnian Lord stay on the flank of the unit and the Man-at-Arms staying on the front of the unit. My Foot Knights decide not to pursue. Because he had that gore unit moving up on the flank, I wanted to change facing and protect the flank of the Man-at-Arms and prepare for that combat that was about to happen. And I believe that'll sum up most of my turn here. Like I said, most of my archers and my trebuchet are just going for whatever opportune shots they can, and the fire spell's just causing maximum damage. And moving on to the Beastmen player's turn, I think you can understand why I was saying I made a bit of a mistake having A, this Bretonnian Lord pursue, and B, this Bretonnian Lord not killing off the Doom Bull when he had the opportunity. Because now he's incredibly exposed to that chariot. And unless my opponent gets very unlucky on the dangerous terrain test, he's going to be taking a lot of impact damage. And spoiler alert, that's what's gonna happen. The Beastman player's chariot charges right in. He's gonna get some nasty impact damage. But I'll just go over the rest of his movement before we get to the combat. There's not really too much. His Ungor unit is going to charge into my unit of Foot Knights, and either they will charge or they will get a fail charge. Apologies, I don't have a photo to reconfirm what happens there, but it'll be a pretty even combat either way. The chariot charges into my lord, the Ungors charge the Foot Knights, and now we can go to the combat. I get 3 wounds from impact damage, which is pretty rough. I believe the Royal Pegasus gives you like an extra wound, so I think I'm at like 5 total. But yeah, I just lost more than half of my HP on that charge, so that was pretty rough. I decide to... I do believe he fell back in good order. Sorry, these things are always getting mixed up in my head here. The fallback result that he had made it so I counted as continuing a charge for the new round of combat. So my lord still had his lance bonus going on here. And it's for that reason that I think I decided to put all my attacks on the Doom Bull. I don't get the heroic killing blow this time, but I believe I get him down to like 2 wounds or so. It was close, but unfortunately not enough, and the Doom Bull is going to retaliate by chopping the head off that Bretonnian Lord and finishing him off right then and there. And I actually made an error. I put a little note up on the screen, hopefully you noticed, but my Man-at-Arms actually failed the pursuit roll and are just kind of watching all this crap go down during the Beastman turn. And I don't actually follow up by charging him when it's my turn. I kind of weighed my odds, and I was like, the Foot Knights are going to be engaging with the Gore unit, or the Ungor unit, on the other side, and I'm probably better off just shooting at him right now. So we basically just hang out and back up a little bit, and I just try to get as many shooting attacks as possible over there. I also still have that wild flame template thing going around the battlefield right now, and I want to let that try to chip in some more damage before the Minotaurs go for round 2 against the Man-at-Arms unit. I think at this stage, all of the shooting attacks, the Lord charging in there, killing a couple of the Minotaurs, and then just the prior combat as well with the Man-at-Arms, I want to say he's reduced to the Doom Bull, which has 1, maybe 2 wounds left, and the unit champion, or like the unit bannerman. At this stage, too, that flame spell has completely killed off the other Minotaur unit. They have been wiped off the battlefield. Moving on to my turn, though, I already kind of mentioned here the shooting was pretty effective for this turn. I wasn't able to finish off the Doom Bull and the lone Minotaur that's attached to him. But my Foot Knights do charge in and pretty much wipe the floor with the Gores in that combat. I kill 4 or 5 of them on the charge. They're reduced to half strength, like, at this point. They chip in, I want to say, 1 or 2 of my Knights, getting a couple of wounds there, but they're going to fall back. I actually failed a pursuit roll here, which was a little bit annoying. He's going to rally, we're going to go for a round 2, and he's going to run again. I'm going to fail the pursuit again. But at this stage, I want to say it's just the BSB and 1 gore left, and they're just going to run off the board. So I'm going to count that as a victory for the Foot Knights, and not a bad performance from them in their second battle that I've taken them in. What happens at this stage is there's only about 1 turn left, I believe. Maybe we had 2 turns left. And the Bull and the Doom Bull, the Minotaur, and the Chariot all charge into my Man-at-Arms unit. I lose the combat by a pretty decent chunk, and I roll my leadership, and I just roll really, really bad. I don't have the BSB nearby either, because he's busy chasing down those gores on the opposite side of the battlefield. And yeah, basically they are going to sprint. I am lucky, and neither unit is going to catch them. They're going to basically rally like right in front of my Trebuchet and my Bowman. You can see in the picture here. And on the very last turn, my opponent's going to charge in and I think finish my unit off before the game actually ends. Or they're going to hold strong and I'll have like 5 or 10 Men-at-Arms left. Ultimately, it's not really going to matter too much. I have all those Foot Knights still. I've got multiple characters attached to that unit, 2 archer units, a Trebuchet. Our points are pretty considerable at this stage, and it's going to be a victory for the Bretonnians. The final battle that the Bretonnians are going to be participating in is a rematch against the Lizardmen. 1250 points against 1250 points again. And I have not changed my list from the prior battle, so, yep, same exact stuff. And we rolled to see if we were going to be getting the other table that we had set up at the house right now, and unfortunately I was condemned to this small table, and I actually rolled for table sides against my opponent, and I got the same side from last time, and I guess if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, pretty similar setup. I shifted the Bretonnian Lord to a bit more of a center position instead of on the left side for my deployment this time. But yeah, I mean, everything's pretty much the same. I got the 2 archers on both the sides of the fences. However, they are skirmishers this time around. I figured that would be the right call since my opponent actually has some shooting this time. And yeah, we got the Foot Knights and the Man-at-Arms holding the center strong. I'll talk a little bit more about the Lizardmen since this is a new situation here and he's not doing the same thing he did in the prior battle like I am. The Lizardman player put his Temple Guard unit on the far right side there, and he's going to have 3 heroes on cold ones. Each one has like a bit of a magical item loadout, but nothing too crazy. More just like a charm shield and like a sword of striking or something like that. But yeah, you can kind of see them individually placed out all across the battlefield. He's got one of them supporting the Temple Guard, a 10-man unit of Skinks also supporting that side, a Stegodon in the middle with the 2 poisonous blowpipe weapons. My opponent was saying that in the old edition, I mean, he's not wrong. In the old edition, you used to be able to shoot that weapon twice, and you basically have 4 poison blowpipe weapons. In the new version here, it seems like you only have 2. If anyone knows the answer to that, please let me know in the comments if you only have the 2 shots with it, or if you get 4 shots. He seems convinced that it was a misprint from Games Workshop and that it's supposed to actually be able to shoot 4 times. But anyways, yeah, he's got that. He has a Skink Chieftain, which is like kind of a new thing to see. I really don't ever recall seeing those in 8th edition. But he's got that embedded in the Temple Guard unit. I remember it has like this Sun Staff that can shoot like a missile attack and also deals a little bit of a extra strength and AP on the character's profile in close combat. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Then he's got 3 Pterodon riders and all melee, little bit of range, no magic at all, which I will say is very surprising for Lizardmen. Oftentimes, I expect them to have magical dominance on the battlefield, but I guess not. And I will be similar to the last one, just because the Lizardman player doesn't really have much long-range stuff, and he's going to spend quite literally the first 2 turns, like the Beastman player, sprinting up and getting as close as possible to me. And I will focus fire with my right side archer unit on those Pterodon riders. I will pretty much shoot down all but one of them before they get into close combat. The rest of my shots are going to just be going on the Skinks and the Cold One hero that's near the Temple Guard. I don't shoot him down before he makes it into close combat, but I do wound him. The Temple Guard have a slow and steady advance. I can't really do too much to deal with them, and instead I'm going to kind of focus my efforts on the Skinks and the Stegodon that he has in the middle of the battlefield. It seems like a strange thing, but I don't know. I was kind of like, if I can tie him up with the man-at-arms unit and then get a flank around with my knights and possibly the Bretonnian Lord, like maybe I can clear it off or at least scare it away and then get a better positioning on the Temple Guard. I will say it does have immunity to heroic killing blow, which is pretty good for the list that I brought here, but I believe it still will deal a wound with no armor save. So even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to one-shot it, I was like, why not? I'll try to get the Lord in there soon. My Bretonnian Lord on turn 2 or turn 3 is going to charge into the lone Pterodon rider that's fighting my archers and get a very advantageous overrun on the Lizardmen's Cold One hero in the bottom there. I actually almost missed it. My opponent reminded me of it too, so very kind of him. And then on the other side there, his one wounded Cold One is actually going to make it into combat. The other one will as well. They're going to finish off that archer unit in due time. My Trebuchet will misfire on the first turn and get that classic misfire result where you can't shoot for the next turn. So yeah, that's the first third of the game with my Trebuchet out of the fight. That's just lovely. When it eventually gets to my turn, I prepare the man-at-arms and move them up to the wood line, and yeah, we accept our reality that Stegodon's going to be charging in. I have the Foot Knights charge into the Skink unit and scare them off the battlefield. I chop down about half of them, but we don't bother making the pursuit roll. We just reposition to get an attack on that Stegodon. And as I mentioned, my Bretonnian Lord finished off the Skinks and the Cold One hero that was on the far other side by the farmstead. He's going to fly in and try to support that battle with the Stegodon. He might not make it for the first round of the combat, but he'll be there in due time. He moves pretty quick. I honestly feel bad at this stage. Playing both these games on the same day, on the same table, and having both of my opponents just seeming to have the worst luck possible in a game of Warhammer. Seriously, they both set up these great opportunities with these hard-hitting units, and they charge in, and the dice gods just slap them in the face. Because, yeah, this Stegodon charges into the flank of my unit, and I remember joking with some of the guys afterwards, being like, hey, how many wounds, do you think the Stegodon's gonna do when it charges in to, man-at-arms, of all things? And he managed to get 3 wounds in, and that was literally it. And to add insult to injury, I think before he did the stomp attack for the final wound, one of my guys actually got a wound through on the Stegodon of all things. So, yeah, that was pretty brutal. I honestly, it feels great to, win a game of Warhammer and all that, but when your opponent just has this bad luck, it's like you're playing the game on easy mode, and they're playing on legendary, and there's nothing they can do about it. You know what I mean? I don't know. So I had a lot of mixed feelings about this. Yeah, it was great to see this happen, and the man-at-arms turn out good, but I was playing on them losing and just trying to use their stubborn rule to have them kind of hold some ground for a little bit, but no, that was not the case. The Dice Gods did not have that in mind. It was really cruel. And yeah, I think the Stegodon actually gives ground in this situation. And I might make a pursuit and eventually get my Bretonnian Lord in on the flank. And at this stage, I think my opponent's morale was a little bit broken. And again, I can't really blame him. When the dice betray you that hard, it can be hard to move on from that. I also, kind of like the last game, I had a lot of magical dominance going on at this time. I could get all my buff spells off. I was constantly casting fireballs and just dealing damage. And I can understand his, frustration at this stage. And also, I had one roll. I rolled all these shooting attacks on one of his Cold One hero guys. And I forgot the -1 to hit for, long range or something like that. And, I had a really good roll, and then afterwards he was like, oh, you forgot that? And I was like, no, you gotta let me keep the roll. And then we started bickering about that, but no, I realized I made the mistake there, and I had to redo it. His Cold One did manage to survive the volley, But then the dice god spit in his face again, and he makes a charge on my unit, fails it by an inch, and then just gets gunned down by bow fire the next turn after. The last remaining cold one decided to do basically a suicide charge on my foot knights that were closing in on the temple guard. Yeah, I thought I was going to need him to kill the Stegodon, but I guess not. The man-at-arms and my Bretonnian lord got the job done on their own. So as the foot knights were approaching the temple guard, the lone cold one that's still remaining, bear in mind he was wounded from earlier in the battle, decides to heroically charge forth and hold the line for his men. However, he comes up an inch or two shy as well, and it was just bad luck after bad luck after bad luck for my opponent. Like, seriously, failing 2 charges in a row by like 1 inch, and just like the Stegodon, it was... I really did feel bad for him at this stage. I don't know, the Lizardmen were just crumbling at this point. The Foot Knights obviously charge in, finish off the wounded cold one hero. And yeah, they go into the Foot Knights. My opponent decided to call it at this point, but we just decided to do a little theoretical out. He said, yeah, your man-at-arms unit's most likely going to get into the flank of my unit. The Bretonnian lord was busy chasing the Stegodon off the board, so he wouldn't come in till later. He wanted to see how the Temple Guard would do against the Foot Knights on the front and my man-at-arms on the flank. And we ended up winning that combat as well, to add further insult to injury, I guess. And again, too, if you're curious with my Foot Knights, I did use my great weapons in one combat. It was this one. This is the only time, and I think it was because even with the AP bonus, like the Temple Guard had a good enough save that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna need this to punch through them. And yeah, they do so. With the Furious Charge rule, it's enough to kind of balance out their stats with the Lizardmen, and then I just have a higher initiative on the charge, even though I have great weapons, that I'm pretty much able to chop them down, and the retaliating blows were not substantial enough, unfortunately, and my opponent decided to call the game after this, and that was another victory for the Bretonnians in the old world. We seem to be a pretty strong army nowadays. I like it. Things are really turning around for these Bretonnians. Not to say we wouldn't get victories in 8th edition. I actually think I played pretty well with my Bretonnians in 8th edition, but it always felt like you had to do every little trick you could to get the victory with Bretonnians, and you really didn't have much available to you, and now, I don't know, I just kind of feel like I'm playing with, like, a full army roster, and my power level is pretty on par with everyone else. At least, again, from my initial impressions so far with the game. We're now going to move on to the last 2 battles that I wanted to cover here. And I might get some stuff off on this, but these were the side battles going on while I was doing my battles on the small table. I was kind of trying to run over to the other side and get a little battle report of what was going on in these other matchups. So the first one we're going to talk about, since we are on the theme of the Lizardmen here, will be the Dwarves versus the Lizardmen. And then after that, it'll be the Dwarves versus the Beastmen. And again, this is going to be on the larger board. So since we're already familiar with what the Lizardman's taking, again, we did not change up our lists or anything in between these battles, I will just go over the Dwarf players list briefly. He wanted to try using some gyrocopters and the gyro bomber. Now, he has a gyrocopter and has plans to get them in the future, but long story short, those 3 Pegasus Knights are not Pegasus Knights. Those are each being proxied as a gyrocopter. And he did just get the Gyro Bomber recently and is building that up. You can see that is actually here present in the battlefield. The Iron Drakes, I believe that's what they're called, they have the flamethrower cannons, and the leader can take the harpoon gun. He's got a unit of, I believe, 5 of them. He also has the Hammerers, I want to say is what they're called, the ones that have the great weapons and pretty decent. I think they have heavy armor. But they have a special rule where I think they ignore, like, the great weapon debuff, which is pretty nice. I think he's got about 10 of those. Maybe he's got 20 of them. He's got a unit of crossbows that I believe took great weapons and actually performed pretty well with them in this game. Looking like he's got about 10 or 15 of those. He's got another unit of handgunners. Looks like there's about 10 of those. And he took the Anvil of Doom again. I believe in the unit of hammers is also a dwarven lord that's being carried on some shield bearers. I don't remember his exact loadout, but I think he had a ruin that gives him toughness 10, which is pretty scary, because in this edition, if you have a toughness that high, some things can't even wound you. So the first, I want to say half of this battle, as strange as that sounds, is going to take place mostly in the air. It is a battle of the pterodons, the gyrocopters, and the bomber, all kind of scattered throughout the center areas of the battlefield. His skinks are going to try to get in a couple of cheeky shots against them, as well as the pterodon. I think the ballista on the stegodon's going to try to take a couple of shots too. Basically, all the range that the Lizardmen have and units that can kind of catch those flyers are going to be engaging in aerial combat. I think his Temple Guard and his Saurus Cavalry are just going to kind of do a steady advance up the battlefield while this is all going on. But I remember going over there and looking at the battlefield, like I said, about turn 3 or so, like halfway, and the melee line still hadn't even come close to making contact. So I really think this aerial dog battle that was going on took up probably the first half of this game. Something else that happened during the first half of this game is, as I mentioned, the melee units were moving up, and I think they got a lot of focus fire from the crossbow lines, I should say, and the one gun line that the dwarves have. But the main thing that was really hitting the Lizardmen hard while they crossed the battlefield was the fire drakes, and specifically that harpoon gun that the leader has. The dwarf player was able to snipe 2 of the Cold One champions before they even made contact with that thing, and I'm pretty sure it has like a D3 multi-wound on it, so yeah, once it got a good shot in, chances are I was going to one-shot that guy. That was pretty devastating, and I do believe the copters and everything do eventually get cleared out, but I think the delay that it caused on the Lizardman line, I mean, again, literally spending like half the game having to engage in this battle and it occupying all of the skirmish unit of the Lizardmen, really kind of hurt them. Because this game was a little ambiguous at the end. I mean, like, they did actually take a point count and everything. But, yeah, basically near the end, the Temple Guard finally made contact with the Dwarven melee line. The Stegodon is alive. It's taken a couple of wounds. I should mention the Gyro Bomber has been trying to focus on the infantry units and not so much the skirmish units. It does okay. It hasn't done, I would say, drastic damage. I guess a lot of the bombs that it actually dropped were duds and just, like, crunched one guy's head in. But it has done a little bit of wounds. I think it did 1 wound to the Stegodon, and it killed a couple of the Temple Guard. So, not too bad. I think the gun actually did a little bit more than the bombs, strangely enough. But, yeah, once the Lizardman melee line kind of finally made contact, they had been so whittled down that there really wasn't much there. And despite the dwarves not having a huge melee focus in this army, I think the crossbows with the great weapon were able to get a lot of work done, and the hammers as well as the Dwarven Lord. As I mentioned, though, at the end of this game, there are still some Temple Guard remaining. The Stegodon was still alive, so I wouldn't say it was a slaughter by any means. And the dwarves did take some casualties along the way, as well as losing most of their bombers and gyrocopters and such. So it was a slim victory for the dwarves in this case, and a narrow defeat for the Lizardmen. And moving on to the final battle in this video, it is the Dwarves versus the Beastmen. And I guess at this stage, I don't need to go over any of the armies now. You know what to expect for both of these armies. Something of a similar story, I would say, with the first 2 turns, Beastmen hoofing it across the battlefield. Again, this Beastman player has no range, no magic, no ambushers, but he does have a pretty decent movement speed. Movement speed that's also faster than the Lizardman that just marched across this battlefield, so that might be beneficial. It's something else that kind of happens is there was a little bit of a prime opportunity that was presented on this battlefield where the Dwarven Gyro Bomber was just close enough to the Minotaurs and the Razor Gore Chariot that they could make a long bomb charge on it. And I think the Minotaurs failed it, but the Chariot passed the charge and just smashed apart the Gyro Bomber on its impact hits before the bomber even got to, like, start doing its bombing runs or anything. So That was a pretty big swing. It was not like the last game where the Lizardmen kind of got occupied for half the game chasing those guys around. The gyrocopters were allowed to make a pass, and they basically just spent the game shooting into the rear of the Minotaur units. But I don't know if it was just a theme this weekend in the dice that we had, but yeah, this dwarf player just had absolutely terrible luck on all of the shots that were going into the Minotaurs. I remember asking them afterwards, because you can see from the picture here, like, he's got really good positioning, and I would expect them to tear that unit apart. But no, actually, most of the casualties that you see that were inflicted on those units was actually from the crossbow and the handgun line, and maybe the Anvil of Doom casting, like a damage spell or something like that. I don't actually know quite well how it works in this new game. But yeah, most of the damage is being done from the infantry and not the copters, as surprising as that is. It's a good battle, and once the melee lines finally clash, the dwarves put up a good fight. But unfortunately, the Minotaurs and most of the other Beastmen units are kind of able to run down the dwarves. They closed the gap a little bit too quick. The gyro bomber being advantageously placed for a Beastman blitz across the battlefield got them much closer than the dwarves were expecting early on in the game there. And yeah, I think that just kind of contributed to the Beastman victory and a dwarven defeat in this final battle here. But that will conclude all of the battle reports for this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I'm going to take a little bit of time now to go over some of the tactics and interesting things I kind of noticed across all these games. Most of our play group decided having a wizard is going to be a key component to most of your lists, it seems like, or at least bring some kind of anti-magic presence. Not to say this hasn't been a thing in Warhammer in the past. I remember playing 8th edition games a couple of months ago, and my halfling list that I took in the Kaiju League didn't have a wizard. And that was like 9 games that I was playing without a wizard, and there were a couple of those that I was definitely feeling the pain of that. But I don't know, in 8th edition, it kind of felt like if I wasn't taking the wizard, I could really kind of structure my list towards like still punching in, and I still have a couple of dice normally to de-spell things. In this game, where you're just rolling the 2d6 and you don't get any bonuses, and I only get like one of those desperate de-spells during each turn, it's really rough. It is far rougher to not have a wizard in this version of Warhammer, I dare say, than like any of the other ones I've ever played. I know I'm just talking about my 8th edition comparison there, but seriously, I really feel like you're at a huge disadvantage in this version, not having a wizard present on the battlefield. I won't linger on this point too long because I've seen a couple of other people amongst all the Warhammer community groups saying very similar thoughts. I don't know if I'm as extreme as a lot of them, because I've seen majority of people say, like, you need to take a level 4 in every single list, and that's that. And I did take a level 4 in my list, so maybe they are right, but I don't know. I was talking to a couple of the people in the play group, and they felt like you could probably get by with a level 2, maybe a level 3, just for, like, anti-magic presence more than anything. Or just even having some kind of chump wizard there to just attempt the de-spell rolls when they occur is, like, more important than anything. And I can understand that logic, but yeah, I think that not taking a wizard is more punishing than ever in Warhammer. So I would definitely consider, when you are not taking a wizard in your list, how are you going to be kind of countering the enemy's play? You really got to make it worth it. Unless, of course, the opponent also is not going to have any kind of magical presence, or, like, yeah, I don't know, it's someone you play against often and you know, like, they just don't really care for magic, and most of their lists are not going to have a wizard. And in that case, I think it's fine to kind of skip out on the magic phase. I mean, you will kind of dominate your opponent, like I said, if you do happen to bring a wizard in that situation. But, yeah. Both players not having any magic presence, I think it's perfectly fine as well to play the game that way. The Lizardman player obviously did have a bit of range, but it was all kind of short-based, and maybe it was the combination of no range and no magic in a few of the battles that I went in here that really kind of made me lean towards this opinion. But yeah, I think having none of that and really trying to excel on just that melee phase is going to be pretty hard for you as a general. I'm sure people can get it done, and I'm going to be going up against some lists that make me completely reconsider this statement. But yeah, I just kind of noticed that having a little bit of range really kind of seemed to help out against some key units in a lot of the matchups that you're going to be facing. And it's for that reason I would recommend taking either that or a little bit of magic to counter those units that you don't really favor for matchups for your army. During all the battles I played, I felt much less presence or strength for Line Hammer, as it's known amongst the community. There were actually one or two times, like the very first battle, I had my Dwarven Slayers in a long line, and it actually kind of betrayed me because I couldn't get around the units in front of me and get them actually into combat, which was frustrating. But yeah, I don't know how strong Line Hammer is per se. I also was reading a couple of discussion groups things in old world communities about, I think it was like the Wildwood Rangers, the Wood Elf unit that can take the great swords, taking on like a High Elf dragon or something, and he had like maximum line frontage and output for attacks, and it just did not matter. He only scraped through like one wound on average, and the dragon was just able to trump this anti-large unit with ease. And I kind of feel that presence to some extent in the games I've watched. Yes, we haven't done maximum frontage for attacks, but I've seen a couple of times now where anti-large units are up against like these big monster characters, and it seems like it doesn't really matter the anti-large factor of the unit. The character's stats pool is just so dominant over them that they're lucky to even get through a couple of hits. And yeah, that's kind of the point that I wanted to go into here, is that I feel like in Old World here, we're looking at less of an era of Line Hammer and more of an era of Hero Hammer, which is something I mentioned in my last video as well. Most of the time I'm building my list towards these expensive characters, less so expensive units. And I feel like a lot of time these characters are punching well above their point values. I mean, a lot of times they're the things that are going to win the battle for you. My Bretonnian Lord on the Pegasus, a very minimal investment as well in a character, but I feel like he had quite a sway in a few of these battles. Same with the Prophetess that I took in most of my lists. Now, Dwarves were a bit of an exception. I think that they are definitely an army that's much more geared towards the units in their roster. So maybe what I'm thinking about here is more of an army basis thing. And in old editions of Warhammer, Bretonnians were very character-centric as well. So maybe this is, again, just kind of something more Bretonnian related. But I will say I think the Beastmen player, like the Doom Bull and like his Minotaurs, are really getting most of the work done, and you could argue that that is more of a unit than a character. I mean, Minotaurs are a unit type. But yeah, that'll kind of carry over into a point I'm going to make a little bit later, so I'll have to hold off on that one. The Lizardman player, I feel like he did a lot worse when he decided to take a lot of cheap characters and just like a ramshackle kind of assortment of units. When he went all in on that expensive Carnosaur Lord, even though it didn't do a whole lot, it just felt so much more threatening than anything he brought to the second battle against me. And yeah, even the Slann Mage Priest, not having a Slann Mage Priest was such a trump for me in that battle. My mage was able to just have complete free will over casting, and I'm sure she got her point value just through her buff spells and her fireballs that she was casting out all game. And again, the same thing could be said with the game against the Beastmen. My Prophetess destroyed so many of those Minotaurs, and even some of the gores and some wounds on the chariots, and she might have even done a wound to the Doom Bull for all I know. Like, she is going way above her point value. But again, I'm talking about Bretonnians, and normally it's a character-based army, but I don't know, it's just a theme I've kind of noticed, is the characters seem to be really excelling in carrying armies in a lot of these situations, more so than the units. Dwarves being the exception to that statement, though. The final point and final exception to my prior statement is that I actually think monsters and or monstrous infantry seem to be in a pretty good state. Initially, I was pretty skeptical of this just because of the supporting attack situation for a lot of them. But, I mean, I'm looking at these Minotaurs and, like, just having a whole army of them seems pretty powerful. I want to get my ogres involved in the game soon and give a little bit more solid feedback on this, but even against just the Minotaurs, talking about like a Stegodon or like I said, the Carnosaur Lord, I guess that's more of a character, but I think you have an opportunity to take these big centric monster or monster type units and have them kind of carry your army and make it a bit more of the central focus versus prior editions where I kind of felt like you had to focus a little bit more on taking like big blocks of infantry or like a cavalry block or something, whatever is going to like kind of fulfill your basic army requirements. Normally, like you would have a big monster type unit like that, but it would be like 1/4 or like 1/5 of your army, if not less. Instead, I feel like you can, I mean, you saw like the Beastman player, you can kind of just build your entire army around these now. And I think that's definitely fun. I don't know if it's the best amount of structure for the game per se. We'll have to see, because I mean, you know, I ended up being the Beastmen in that game, so I don't really want to hate on it too much and say it's unbalanced. Like I took like a pretty relatively standard list and I seemed to do fine against it. So maybe it's just more of a gimmick thing than anything. So talking about the Foot Knights, I wanted to discuss this because number one, I know Games Workshop just put them up for pre-order and I'm sure a bunch of people want to get them and haven't bothered running them yet. And yeah, I thought it'd be pretty useful to have a little bit of a tactics breakdown and give my experience with them so far. I'm also just kind of excited to finally have this unit in the game. I know Bretonnians way back in the day used to have a unit like this, but I pretty much play 6th edition Bretonnians and there's not really anything like that in that rulebook. So yeah, what have I kind of gathered are some key points about the unit. First thing is they are a really strong and sturdy elite melee unit that is core. These guys have comparable stats to an Empire Greatsword, which again, it's not core, that's special. And that's a huge benefit, I think, for Bretonnians, who I think traditionally had a bit of a lacking core option list, and you know, this really kind of helps fill it out, especially with the lack of dominant melee foot presence. We really needed this kind of solid brick unit, or if you want to kit them out this way, like this really hard-hitting hammer unit that can break through the enemy's battle lines. Again, with the stat line that these units have, and the equipment and loadout and all the special rules, I really feel like this is something most armies are going to have in their special category, and Bretonnians should be very grateful to have it in their core. The next point I want to make is they have great defenses. I know I just mentioned they kind of work a bit better as a hammer unit instead of being a bracing anvil, but trust me when I say these defenses can help in all situations. Yeah, they've got the heavy armor, you can give them shields for that 4-up save, but it's the fact that they're also, most situations, going to have the Blessing of the Lady for that ward save as well. Really pretty solid defenses that I think puts them over the edge, again, of their great sword comparison, which, again, is a special unit. This is a core unit that I'd argue has even better defenses. I'd also argue with their Furious Charge special rule, they've got even better attack output. Now, I don't play Empire. I do have a little Empire collection, but I haven't played Empire in the Old World yet, so maybe I'm wrong, and the great swords for Empire have Furious Charge as well, but it's not a rule they used to have, so I'm kind of comparing them that way in my mind, and the fact that they get a larger attack pool, like the same weapon skill, I don't know. I think they've got an amazing damage output, solid defense, good enough defense as well that you don't necessarily need to use those shields, you know, all the time. Depends what type of battle you're in. If you know the enemy's not going to have any range attacks or spells, they're just going pure melee, I don't know, maybe just take the great weapons, especially if you know you're going to be going into a unit that's really well armored. Now, during my battles, I found this unit to have amazing synergy with the Lady's Wrath spell, and I'm sure this spell could honestly be good on 90% of the melee units in the Bretonnian roster, probably every unit in the Bretonnian roster. So this might be a bit of a redundant point I'm making here, so fair enough if you kind of want to toss this one out. But yeah, a lot of times during these battles I was in with the Foot Knights, I was pretty much having that spell on them 24/7, and it was so beneficial that there were a lot of situations where I was like, I don't know, I'm fighting skinks and they're toughness 2, and I thought to myself, well, why would I want to use great weapons, right? Like, there's a decent enough chance one of these skinks might cheek in a little bit of a wound at me. I'm going to be wounding them on 2s with the Lady's Wrath spell, which gives you +1 strength and armor piercing. The armor piercing's enough to negate the save on the skinks, who have like a 6-up now, I believe. So yeah, a really solid spell on this unit. It can justify using the hand weapon shields in a lot of combats, and I did exactly that in a lot of the games I was in. There were a couple of times, like when I was fighting the Temple Guard, that was like the one time I wanted to use the great weapons because the AP -1 wasn't really going to be enough to threaten their defenses, and I also just had a faster initiative even with great weapons because of the bonus you get from the charge. Lizardmen are super slow. So I figured, yeah, that was kind of a win-win situation for me. And it's for that reason that I think the hand weapon shields are actually really good on them, and the great weapons are kind of a bit more situational. That could be because of the Lady's Wrath spell I continually had on the unit, though, more than anything. So I kind of wanted to make that a point that it synergizes really well with them. Another thing I found synergized really well with my Foot Knights during the battles I was playing in is having a Man-at-Arms unit advance further ahead than the Foot Knights and basically brace for an enemy charge. With that Blessed Triptych, a Sergeant-at-Arms in the unit, and just like a decent amount of ranks, there's a really good chance that unit's not going to break and they're just going to kind of give a bit of ground. And honestly, you kind of want that because the closer the enemy gets, the easier it'll set up the charge for the Foot Knights. And yeah, that was a play I found myself making quite often during these battles. So I think they have a lot of synergy with a cheaper unit like that can just kind of be your line holders, and then you send these guys in to clean up whatever mess charged into them. The final point I want to make about these iron-cladded lads is that they are a great character bunker. I'm sure you noticed I put my Foot Knight BSB in this unit. I also, most of the time, I think I put the Prophetess inside of this unit. She has a rule where she can, like, embed herself inside the unit and cast out of it, and a few of her spells are only, like, targeting her and the unit she's attached to. I think she also just comes with, like, inherent magic resistance and a couple other buffs that she gives to units. So she's a really good character to kind of put inside a unit like this if you're not going to be running, like, a mobile cavalry force. Consider putting your characters inside a solid unit of Foot Knights instead. Let's get wrap the video up, though. I hope everyone enjoyed all the battle reports and my little post-game analysis here. And let me know if you plan on getting the new Foot Knights that Games Workshop is releasing. I definitely like the models, but unfortunately I splurged a little too much on buying all the rule books. So that's going to be a purchase maybe later in the year for my Bretonnians. Plus, I got a pretty big to-do pile for them. I got a bunch of Pegasus Knights I want to finish up, and a couple of Grail Knights that I plan on making extra fancy for the army. Plus, I already made this pretty cool proxy unit, and I'm happy with the results for it. I definitely want to go back, get a couple more things done with it, spend a little bit more time on them, but that'll be something else I get done further down the line. Anyways, that's going to be it. Have a great day, and the next video will be coming out soon. Bye-bye.